Well, thanks everyone for being here, and to the panelists. I'm Eric. I'm a senior correspondent with Government Executive. Just warning from the top, you'll be hearing a lot from me today, and like Sam mentioned, we just launched our podcast. So if you don't like the sound of my voice, don't download the podcast because I'm all over that thing. And a second warning, I took some notes on my phone, so take my word for it. I'm not checking Instagram. I'm not getting bored. I just want to make sure I know what I'm talking about here. Hugh, I'm going to ask you to kick us off here because you've moved around a lot in your career in terms of different installations and bases that you've been at, and you've been a part of various workforce transformations. So what did those look like? How did they come together? And what sort of best practices, what sort of lessons did you learn as you went through them?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak this morning. This is quite factually a rapidly evolving problem set that we have, meaning as we adopt new technologies and business practices and methodologies, unfortunately, that's the rate of change is growing faster than how we can change our workforce. So I think this requires a multi-pronged approach, and that's what we've done over time. Call them lines of effort, if you will. First of all, we have to adapt our recruiting practices to recruit the talent that we're looking for. And I'll give an example. If we acknowledge that, speaking in terms of technology and the STEM fields, and the workforce that we're searching for, the skill set we're searching for resides in the younger generations, we need to adapt our recruiting practices to go after those younger generations. If you ask an employee or a candidate a question such as, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Those of us that have been in the federal workforce for quite some time expect a certain answer from a candidate. But these younger candidates may not have a good answer right now. They may tell you, quite honestly, I don't know. And we have to be comfortable with a candidate who gives us that answer. If in fact, that younger generation is who we're going after. We have to understand the dynamics of that generation and adapt our recruiting practices to go after that. Secondly, I think we need a rapid infusion of new skills, quite frankly, and I'm speaking for the Department of the Army, the workforce I'm familiar with, and on the civilian side. And we've done that through some direct hire authorities that we've been provided by OPM, and we go after the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics professionals. And we're able to now go to colleges, universities where that skill set resides, and quite honestly, get their resume and bring them in the civilian or the federal workforce quite rapidly. And so we've leveraged those authorities, and it's been quite successful for us. Thirdly, as was mentioned earlier, we need to ensure that our workforce is more agile than they have been in the past. Conceptually speaking, the days of the widget makers and the gadget making specialists are over, right? We may talk in terms of manufacturing generalists now, just conceptually speaking. And so we have to give them the skill sets such as interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, awareness, and I would even say mindfulness. It's the ability to take an employee out of the widget department, put them in the gadget department, and they'll be very comfortable operating there. They may have a small learning curve, but at the end of the day, they will perform. And so we need to ensure that those processes, educational processes, are in place. And I'm a big fan. I'll throw this out there. There's a course out there called Leadership for Non-Supervisors. If you've taken that course, that's a great foundational course to give your employees. And then finally, I will say you have to have a robust knowledge management program in place, because when you find these individuals that possess the skill sets that you're looking for, quite frankly, you need to be able to capture what they brought to your workforce, because the odds are this younger generation may not be in your workforce very long. Okay, that's been our experience. So when they come to your workforce, they bring a certain business practice, they bring a certain mindset or technological capability to capture that, so that you can pass it on to your legacy employees, if you want to call that, or the next generation that comes along, so that you don't lose that practice. And the last thing I'll leave you with, and I'm sorry, I said the previous one was the final, I'm sorry, is we've been very successful at funding professional certifications and licensures and degrees. If that's a budget, that's an investment we've consciously made. Quite frankly, we've gotten to the point where we've found it easier to find the funding as opposed to the personnel that's willing to devote the time to those things. But when those educational opportunities come up, capitalize on them and fund them. Okay.
Dia, I want to ask you to build off that with what the sort of future of the workforce will look like. But before we do, I want to address the elephant in the room, hopefully not literally in the room.
Right.
But CDC has its hands full at the moment. And since we're talking about training here, I want to try to frame it that way. How does your agency prepare employees sort of generally for any threats that might arise, versus how do you get everyone up to speed and trained when there's a very specific threat like we're seeing with the novel coronavirus?
Right, so thank you for that question.
Sure.
And so CDC has already in its structure a pretty robust preparedness and response center. So we have a center for preparedness and response, and their main mission is to ensure that the agency is prepared to ensure that states and locals are also prepared to respond to not just corona, but any public health threat. So we do that on an ongoing basis. Also, many people may not know, CDC is also one of the larger federal agencies with what we call our Uniform Commission service, so the public health service. So we have military-based officers whose mission is to be available 24/7 to deploy and respond to public health emergencies as they exist. So that's another area where we kind of make sure we have this elite cadre of workforce that is available to us any moment, anytime. We also, recognizing that we have a structure in place, that we have Commission Corps, but we also know that we have to prepare our current workforce for threats as they exist. So a couple of years ago, we established what we call a Global Rapid Response Team, or GRIT. That team is trained on an ongoing basis to be ready and ready to be deployed at any time to prepare for any threat, not just corona as it exists today. We're also, through our CDC University, we have a whole educational arm at CDC for our broader workforce. We have what we call a School of Preparedness and Response. And so there's coursework available for any employee, actually, whether you're kind of currently in preparedness and response, or whether you have an interest and an acumen and a competency for that, but we make sure that we use that forum to prepare them, and we prepare them along the lines of risk communication or incident command. So we want to make sure that they have those core skills to respond. And then finally, as I said earlier, we have a deep bench in terms of emergency response protocols. We make sure that those individuals are ready to respond to threats as they exist. We have a really robust emergency operations center that is monitoring threats every single day. So that's really how we prepare our existing workforce. That's how we're structured to respond. And that's how we ensure that our existing workforce is prepared if we need to deploy additional staff resources to respond to any public health threat.
Well, that's a great point about the certain core skills that are needed. There's, I imagine, certain truths that apply to any sort of outbreak or situation that might arise. So, making sure that they're well versed in that so
Yes.
that they can apply it. So now I want to get back to this idea of looking forward at what the workforces look like. I know CDC went through a sort of big future of work sort of examination. How did that come to be? How did you execute it? What lessons did you learn from it?
Sure. So last year, we have a pretty robust enterprise risk management kind of process within the agency. And so one of the workforce that this group identified, one of the risks that this work group identified was workforce. The Enterprise Risk Management Governance Board is constituted of our scientific directors from across the agency, our administrators from across the agency, and they realized that workforce for us was a risk, a moderate risk, but a risk nonetheless. And they recognize that we have high potential for retirement of our workforce. Although our workforce,
Heads nodding out here.
yes, and I know I have my data folks sitting back over here in CDC in the room, so they know we have a workforce that's aging and that may be preparing to retire at any moment now, and we need to effectively manage that knowledge transfer. We also recognize that we have to evolve as an agency in order to be fit for mission, as Dr. Schuckett will say, fit for mission mission for the future, so for now through 2030. So over time, we again brought together experts from across the agency, and we convened what we call our Future of Work Task Force, and we were charged with trying to find ways to mitigate that risk that had been identified by our task force. So we also thought about some of the disruptors that were happening. Again, technology as a disruptor, our ability to be agile in terms of getting testing methods out to laboratories as they're working. So how do we do that faster and better? And how do we ensure that we continue to look like that organization that you want to go to in the future when you need public health assistance. So again, the task force itself also looked at ways to help employees develop those future critical skills. So I talked about that again along the lines of preparedness and response, but that's not the only area where we need for employees to develop future critical skills. So we looked at how we do that. We also looked at new career paths that we need for the future for our workforce. We have great career maps for our existing workforce, but when we're talking about either reskilling, retooling, upskilling a workforce, we have to have those career paths outlined, the competencies defined, and a method by which employees can actually be retrained. So we did a little bit of that work too. We also talked about employee engagement and how we continue to engage this workforce. So again, as we're recruiting that younger workforce, how do we keep them there? How do we ensure our managers aren't running them off after we've invested time to kind of get them ready for that? So that was another area where we looked at. So we put tools together for our supervisors and our hiring officials to make sure they were ready. And I would say we also finally kind of looked at how we, again, build organizational alliances through rethinking how we do the work we do, where our skill gaps are. And so we're, again, working right now to fully implement many of the recommendations that came out of it. But it's really about building managers, building their skills, building profiles for the future, and finding ways, creative ways to reskill and retool and upskill our workforce. Because even though we have a lot of individuals at CDC who are eligible to retire, my folks know people don't leave right away. They stay on average 4 to 5 years past their retirement eligibility date. So we have to make sure that that workforce that stays is agile and committed to mission.
Great. And by the way, to everyone in the audience, if we have a few minutes at the end, we'll try to take a question or two. So if you have any, start thinking about what you might want to ask. Peggy, I don't want to let you off the hook here.
I thought I was going to get a break.
Well, it turns out CDC is the only agency preparing for a big event in 2020. So I think there's probably a lot of lessons to be learned from this enormous task that you're taking on to bring in literally millions of applications, sort through all of those, make hiring decisions, onboard them, train them, deploy them in a very short amount of time. So how do you do it?
Okay. Well, why don't we just start a little bit with how we ramp up for a census. Yeah. So as most of you know, and we're mandated by Congress to conduct the census every 10 years. So that's what most people will know us for. The census, decennial census that comes up every 10 years, although we work the other 9 years. There's many other surveys that we collect data for other agencies. Yes, for other agencies as well as other companies that pay us to conduct specific surveys. So we're responsible for data collection. As we prepare to ramp up for the census, I'm sure you all have started seeing a lot of our advertisements on TV about the census. It doesn't just start. They will start planning for the next census 2 years after this one is over. So a lot of the guidance we receive comes from headquarters. And we have 6 regional offices, and we're one of the regional offices here in Atlanta, and we cover 7 states. So we are responsible for a large territory. And the target from headquarters is to have an applicant pool of 518,514 applicants. And we are at about 470,000 applicants. And we'll pull from that pool as different operations occur. We currently conducted the address canvassing, which is where we go out and verify all the addresses. There's a big process. So we hired about 7,000 people, throughout our 7 states for that operation. And we have a regional office that's a permanent office, but during decennial times, we open in each of the regional offices a regional census center. And that office is specifically focused on the preparations and the data collection for the decennial census. So in that regional census office, we hire about 200 people that are in that office. But then we have area census offices that we open. In 2018, we opened 9 of them. Those were our early offices. And then later in 2018, we opened 33 more offices throughout the 7 states. So we have a total of 42 of those area census offices that we are responsible for. And they are the people that are in those communities or in those areas that are responsible for making sure we collect the data in those areas. Let's see, in terms of how we advertise and recruit, and we have a lot of partnerships. We go out into every city, talk to the mayors, talk to partners in the community who are invested in making sure we count all their people, because they know this means funding for their different programs in the state. So they partner with us and make sure that, we have the facilities to come out and test the people and have different meetings to tell them about the census job opportunities and, try to encourage them to apply for those jobs. And we do get a lot of applicants. The one thing that's not helping us this time, last census, unemployment rate was up. So we had all kinds of applicants coming from everywhere. And we hire, range from the student, someone who's 18, you have to be at least 18 to someone who's 80. We have all different age ranges, diversity that work for us. So, we have to be prepared to be able to train as well as recruit those people. So it is a big, big, big operation. It's challenging but rewarding when you finish and there are different targets. So the offices are very competitive to make sure they meet their goals. Goals are set for specific offices based on their territory and people in their area. So it's not just something that happens overnight. There's a lot of planning that goes into this, and there are a lot of people involved. During 2010 census, we only had 3 states, and we hired over 80,000 people for those 3 states. So imagine now with 7 states. We had a reorganization in 2012, and Atlanta gained some additional states. We're responsible for Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, New Orleans, and Mississippi. I think that was 7. So those are the states that we are responsible for.
So if anybody is looking for a side hustle, there's still about 80,000 applicants.
Yes, and thank you for that, because we do have waivers that people from other agencies can work part-time with us as well. So don't hesitate to look in that, or tell your neighbors. Tell your neighbors as well. Anyone who's looking for a job, it's an opportunity for them to get some experience. You'll be dealing with the public, so a lot. But we have in our permanent office about 1,500 field staff who do data collection full time, and they love it. We have people retiring from those jobs that they've done it for years. They like being out, calling on the phone, or out talking to people in their communities. They're working in their communities, so it's definitely a great opportunity.
So once you bring everybody on board, how long do they spend in training before they get, if they're enumerators sent out into the field?
Right. It depends on the type of job that they have, and it's different types of training, and it's structured. Each regional office is doing the same thing. We get a lot of training from headquarters. Some of it is online, some of it is in person. Some of it they may do online before they come to a training session. So it's varied types of training, and a lot of it happens. The managers, there are about 6 managers that are hired in each ACO, so they're responsible for making sure the training happens. Sometimes it means bringing everybody to a central location. Say one of the positions we have is a regional technician, and that person they're like all over the place. If someone resigns in an ACO, they will go in that ACO and make sure that operation continues until a new person is hired. So it's very different types of jobs that we have.
Great. Dee, I want to come back to something that you brought up earlier. You mentioned that you you wanted to make sure that managers don't scare away new employees. So how, and we've seen an emphasis, I think, in this administration and really probably the last couple administrations on training not just the rank and file, but the management level employees, supervisors, to make sure that they're not just technical experts, but they know how to actually manage people. They know how to do a proper performance evaluation, and they know how to reward employees when that's appropriate, or discipline employees when that's appropriate. So how do you ensure that? How important is it to make sure that the managers, have those skills, and how do you make sure that they have them?
Right. So our employee viewpoint survey tells us every single year kind of how our employees feel about supervision and supervisors. And so what we recognize is that there's a huge need to make sure that those managers are prepared, that they have high emotional intelligence, that they're focused on continuous learning and employee development. And so one thing we do through CDC University, we have a school for leadership management and development. And one of their primary focuses is to embrace new supervisors and to ensure that within that first year of supervision that they are monitored and tracked to ensure that they complete a series of courses that ensure that they understand the rules, the regulations, the policies. They may have taken that supervision or leadership for non-supervisors. They may have taken that, but what we need to make sure is that they understand all the rules of the road so that they can't claim ignorance, that they're empowered and knowledgeable of what those skills are, and that they have sources and connections with other managers who may be struggling through the same things they are. So we focus there with new supervisors for 1 year and do some intentional development with them. We use a kind of a modular approach. So some of it's online learning, some of it is classroom-based learning, some of it requires some coaching and mentoring assignment. So again, we're very focused within that first year. We monitor to the point too where in some instances, and I'm not going to say it's a perfect way that it's done, but if a supervisor does not complete that training within 1 year, it could be performance affecting for them if they don't complete it. So we are, again, looking at that as well. For our experienced supervisors, we also do training throughout the year, focus heavily on employee and labor relations to ensure, again, that they're building their skills on how to manage employees, how to do better and more effective performance management, and to do that performance management not just once a year. We're actually moving, or our Department of Health and Human Services is actually moving toward a performance management system that requires quarterly discussions versus just that mid-year and that end of year. Because again, employees need to know that how they're doing, not just at the end of the year, but they need to get that constant feedback and coaching throughout the year. So again, we'll be doing more training with our managers to make sure they're prepared to be able to do that new method, and that they also invest the time they need to do it effectively. So we bring all the mandatory trainings that most supervisors have to do. I'm sure managers here love all that mandatory training you have to take every year. No fear, the EEO-based training, the reasonable accommodation-based training, all of the above. But again, we want to make sure that you have the tools in your hand and resources available to you via toolkits or other sites that we provide to managers so that you can effectively manage their workforce and hopefully retain and engage a workforce that's highly productive.
Hugh, do you have thoughts on this? Is it your experience that a bad manager can make you lose a good employee?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's.
So, what we found, the biggest seam, if you want to call it that, is the transition from an employee to new supervisor, right? For those veterans and retirees out there, you probably recognize that you are promoted based on your potential as opposed to your past performance. However, in the federal workforce, we tend to promote based on your past performance and not your future potential. So let's take a civil engineer. They may have progressed through the ranks based on their technical competencies as a civil engineer, and then one day they wake up and find themselves as a new supervisor. and they have no basis for or experience as a new supervisor. And that's where we tend to go off the rails in our workforces, when we allow those new supervisors with no baseline training, no foundational skills to now take over an office, and as opposed to having one employee who may sink your organization, for lack of a better word, and you have an employee who has the potential to sink 3 or 4 employees in your organization because it will spread. And so I agree completely. We need to ensure that we have that foundational skills for our new supervisors, so that we don't allow one person to potentially get your organization off the rails, because they can, right? We have. But our obligation as leaders is to identify those situations and proactively ensure that they don't occur.
And there's obviously, it makes sense. There's a focus on new supervisors. Is it also ongoing? And this is to anybody, if you feel free to jump in. That it's sort of continuous learning, making sure that you keep those skills sharp as they age throughout their careers?
Yes, we do. So in the Army, we have what's called the civilian education system. And if you're a veteran or retired, you've progressed to the NCO or the officer ranks, you're familiar with progressive levels of formal education. The Army is attempting to develop a similar program for civilians. So as they progress up the civilian supervisory positions and grades, that they go to progressively more or broader or more difficult leadership type of classes, so that we don't leave them behind. But we're not quite there yet. It is a work in progress, but that is the end state goal of the Army, is to have a formal system such as that in place for civilians, as well as the NCOs and the officers.
I just want to follow up on that a little bit, Dia or Peggy, if you have thoughts. To what extent do you try to build supervisors that can sort of move out of one team and go to somewhere else, just because even if that's not their technical expertise, they know how to manage people or they know how to manage programs, so they can actually sort of move around easily. Is that a goal that you strive for?
At Census and headquarters, there are a lot of opportunities for that. Regional offices are a little limited. We do move, employees do move. You may work one survey today, and next year we're moving you to another survey, so that you learn all the surveys, and the aspects of each is different, and you have to work differently with each of the teams. So there's not a lot of opportunity for moving in a regional office, but at headquarters there, is a lot of opportunity, or was. I worked at headquarters as well. And what we saw some at headquarters, everybody's just not a supervisor. No matter how much you try to force them to be a supervisor, they're just not a supervisor. So in some areas, we look to see, did we need that many supervisors in that particular area in order for someone to get promoted? And we created some areas where there were more technical promotional opportunities versus, it had to be supervisory, because that's where their strength was, in the technical area, not so much as a supervisor.
Go ahead.
And I was going to say, so because of the technical nature and heavy scientific nature of our agency, we don't see as much of that movement in terms of those line supervisors. Where we see more mobility and kind of a plug and play is at our executive ranks in many instances. So whether scientific or whether SES or SL, we see them moving around because we can have them lead organizations not based on that technical background.
Gotcha. So to build off that a little bit, and I understand that there's some sort of inherent limitations on this, but we heard it mentioned already. There's an emphasis lately, especially in this administration, on this notion of reskilling. There was in the president's most recent budget that came out earlier this month. There was a promise to reskill 400,000 federal employees, and that would sort of be handled at the agency level. Now, I know this is new to most of you probably. So even if you're not using that sort of language yet, what efforts do you have underway to help employees sort of redeploy their existing skill sets in new ways, or maybe learn new skill sets altogether? And or is the answer that this is still a challenge for you all, and is it something that you're trying to build up? I don't know if anyone has.
I'll jump first. So it is still an ongoing challenge for us, and it was something that we recognized through our work in Future of Work with the Future Work Initiative. Where we are seeing some success, however, is in the area. I'm sure others probably have seen this too. Is in the area of IT and cybersecurity and data science. And so what we found is that in the IT workforce, they have a core set of skills that kind of position them in many instances to be reskilled or upskilled or retooled in some instances. And so as that field is emerging, we're finding ways and looking for more ways to more effectively retrain them so that we can redeploy them as the mission evolves. It requires an investment of resources to do that, and sometimes those are tight, but we're very strategic in terms of how we're going about it, and starting with the workforce where we can definitely see a direct connection and immediate benefit to that reskilling because we can retrain them and get them into another field area pretty quickly. So that's kind of one area, and then we'll be looking to figure out how we can expand that type of approach in our different occupations.
Hugh, you mentioned earlier that you wanted to sort of have generalists, and if someone had to go from the widget to the gadget, that they'd be able to make that transition. How do you make sure that that happens?
Well, kind of circle back to your earlier point a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
That is a great challenge for us.
Yeah.
We are committed to reskilling the workforce, but there are some things that as was pointed out, budgets are issues, and quite frankly, identifying the requirements are a big challenge for us. What are those new skill sets that we need? That's a fundamental challenge we have. I'll give you an example. So we talk about installations of the future, right? Facilities that do predictive maintenance. In other words, the facilities tell us when they need to be fixed or a boiler needs to be fixed, as opposed to us doing a preventive maintenance. Well, that briefs well, but what skill set do we need in the workforce to enable the installation of the future? That's still a question that needs to be answered. So going back to now your question, how do we build these generalists? There is no centralized methodology to build these generalists. We empower each of our installations or garrisons to do that. And for us, it's a little bit of self-learning. And it's understanding what the resources are out there. Are there turnkey but customizable solutions that get you where you think you need and to leverage those? Or are there existing solutions that exist, educational systems that you need to leverage? So again, it's a challenge. But we're doing that right now at a local level.
So it sounds like maybe there's some trial and error. You're just trying to see what works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Peggy, you just were talking about your time at headquarters and how there was opportunities there a little bit for people to move around. What were some of the benefits of that you saw? How does that sort of make a more well-rounded employee? And I know you said it's more limited at the regional level. Do you think it would make sense to expand that some more?
At the regional level?
Sure.
It's very limited at the regional level. So if they wanted opportunities in other areas, I'll use myself as an example. Mm-hmm. I've started out in Human Resources Division, so I have a lot of experience working in human resources, recruitment, staffing, classification, EEO, employee relations. I learned all about what employees do on the job that I never knew those kind of things happen. So I transitioned from there to more of the statistical area where I am now in field division that deals with the data collection opportunity. So I've had an opportunity to come out to the regional office twice and back to headquarters. So persons at headquarters also have the opportunity. We have a young lady in our office now working for a year who's from headquarters, who came out to get some experience in the regional offices. So the opportunities are there, but a little bit limited in terms of in the regional offices. I guess we could, if employees were interested and there were opportunities to go to other agencies, then that would be an opportunity that we could explore as well. But within the office, it's a little bit limited. But in the position of survey statistician, they are learning a lot of human resources skills because they're responsible for a particular area, so they're responsible for making sure that they have staffing. If they need 100 field representatives, they need to monitor the staffing for their area to make sure they keep those levels to where they need to be to make sure we are able to get efficient data collection for that month. We do surveys on a monthly basis, so we're constantly out there working, knocking on your doors and calling people. So when people get those notices, please let them know that it's real. Most of the people we're getting now, they're saying, oh, that's the census. This is not, the Census Bureau. They're thinking of the decennial census only. So, but there's a lot that we do. So there, is a lot of opportunity.
And so there's, even within one position, that's sort of there's more than one skill that needs to go into that. So that's sort of embedded in there as learning, multidisciplines.
Yes, because they're managing 10 to 12 field supervisors. So they're constantly, communicating with those employees, making sure they meet deadlines and we stay on target to close out the survey.
Great. Well, before I chew up all of our time, I do want to give the opportunity, if there's any questions. Let's start right here. We do have a microphone coming, I believe, right here.
Thank you. Good morning. This is a question for Hugh Harden. My question is, you mentioned earlier that your agency focuses on promoting professional certification. And I'm curious to know what types of certification. Is it the mediation? Is it Six Sigma? Is it soft skills like coaching?
It's broad, right? So think of a garrison. That's my organization. A garrison is a city, right? So I have everything from a director of public works to licensed clinical social workers on my staff. And so when I say certifications, it's those requirements that they have professionally to practice their profession. And in some cases it is a reskilling. If we have a gap in our ability to deliver services to our community, but we have an employee who's willing to go through some educational certification process, we do that. So it's hard to point to one particular certification. It's broadly speaking. So that, our social workers tend to be LCSWs. Our architects and engineers have certain certifications. We prefer professional engineers, and we'll help you get there. So it's a broad statement. It's not narrowly focused.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, Paula Randler, U.S. Forest Service. This question is for Ms. Taylor, but for anyone who might answer. What do you do with the responsibility to remove a manager who might not make the transition from technical expert to manager with all of the coaching and training and support that is provided? How do you deal with that?
Right. That's a great question. And it's never an easy thing to do, I will say. And so what we've done over time when we work through the coaching process, when we've worked through mentoring, when we've worked through, trying to retrain and kind of get that manager and into a better place, I would say the agency is now taking a position where we will move managers. And most of the time we're going to move them in. Most of the time they have really strong technical skills, but those technical skills have not transitioned them or transferred them into being an effective leader of people with similar technical skills. So we'll work to try to identify opportunities for them that are technically in nature or in line with their background and capabilities to make sure that they are able to continue to contribute positively to the mission of the agency. So we work it that way, and when all else fails, we will help to release you to your destiny. If that destiny is outside of our agency, then that's fine. But the one thing we recognize is that we have to help them become better. I know of a couple of situations where it has been effective, where that person was able to be kind of rehabilitated and kind of make a shift in terms of how they manage and lead others. But in other situations, we again put them into a technical space where they can continue to contribute.
So that could be after the fact. In a supervisory role, it's not working out, and then you talk to them, let's get you back into doing what you're good at.
Yes, absolutely. Again, because we hired them most of the time not as a non-supervisor in many instances, and they were able to positively contribute in that way, and they're strong technically, you can't deny that. They just can't manage other people, even with help. So again, we move them back to that, where they're strong.
Yeah, it's a really different skill. And from my perspective as a journalist, Generally, as you build your career as a reporter, then you become an editor. And it's like, what about being a reporter has trained you to manage other reporters? Nothing. They're very grumpy people. Peggy, you were talking about this also, this notion that managing is not for everybody, no matter how much you want it to be. So do you sort of sometimes go back after you've promoted someone, or you try to identify those skills before they've reached that point?
Well, what I'd like to say is when you're promoted to supervisor, you're on a probationary period, and managers should take advantage of that probationary period. It's there. This is a chance to see, can they do the job or not? And sometimes with coaching and all of that, they are not able to do the job, and managers will have to make the hard decision to say, this is not working. Sometimes employees will come and say, this is not what I expected, and they will ask to go back. Rarely does that happen, but I've seen that happen. As high as 14s have asked to go back to 13s because they didn't want that responsibility. So, but we have to utilize those probationary periods. Even when we hire new employees, we tell managers this probationary period is for you to evaluate this employee after coaching and everything else to see, if they're going to work out, because there's a much longer process to terminate employees once they pass their probationary period. But during that supervisory probationary period, we should be using that. That's the purpose of it, and we should be effectively using that.
Are there any other questions out there? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nick Blaze from the CDC, and my question is for Peggy. In an age where we have millennials who do not want to be labeled, how does the census look to capture their input? Because they are the future of our environment, and how do you go to target that younger group that has so many ideas and ways to take our country forward, but they don't want to be labeled and they see the census as labeling them?
Okay, in terms of hiring them, are you asking me in terms of hiring them or having them work in the organization?
Both hiring them as well as capturing their status in our society.
Okay. We do at headquarters, and limited here, but we do do a lot of recruiting at our local universities. At headquarters, I manage the recruitment branch that we had a centralized recruitment program that we went to over 100 colleges and universities every year, because the agency wants that in the environment, that knowledge that, ever changing. If we stay the same, we will never grow. So we do want those individuals in the organization. So we let them know that, they are valued and their opinions are valued. I have so many that I recruited or, that are now in high-level positions and, keep in contact with me. And I actually was able to convince 2 of them to come out and work the decennial and getting promotions to come out. So we definitely, utilize that, and they know that they are valued within the organization.
We might have time for one more question. Does anybody else have one? Right here.
Thank you. Debbie King with Evolution Management. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how virtual employees are being brought into the training and reskilling process when, they're not there at the office.
Yeah, you can take that, because we don't do a lot of telework in our regional office.
So we do, as an agency, have employees across the world. So we have, over thousands of employees in international settings. We have, although our headquarters is based here in Atlanta, we have locations, mines in Morgantown, Virginia, Pittsburgh. We have locations in the kind of DC, Maryland, Virginia area. So we consider them to be virtual employees in some instances. And so what we've done is, when we have certain courses that are suitable for virtual learning, especially if it's a classroom-based course, we find methods to deliver that coursework to them where they are. And so we're changing our technology and our approach to learning to meet their needs. It's not perfected yet, I will say, and we're trying to find ways to perfect it and then expand it, also where we have those soft skill level courses that are not necessarily those things that you can do right in front of a computer, but that require that greater interaction, trying to find ways to do that virtually as well. So I would say we're venturing into it by changing the way we approach it to make sure that we reach them, offering courses at different time zones, again, making sure that we're capturing those employees where they are. We actually have a segment of our workforce in HR at certain times of the year that comes in really early in the morning so that they can reach those international employees and do the training that they need to ensure they don't feel like they're left out. So again, we're doing what works for them and adapting to that.
Great. Well, that is all the time that we have. Again, thank you, all three of you, for being here. It was a really great conversation.